The Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
I remember when The Dark Knight Returns came out. I remember when Watchmen came out. So, of course, I remember when Kingdom Come came out.
Kingdom Come is 4 separate issues, 48 pages apiece. It was an all-immersive kind of lifestyle for me.
It blew people away. I mean, this was the most sought-after book there was.
This was something very new, very different.
No one had seen anything like that at that scale before.
It was amazing.
I never thought from anything that people would still be talking about this book 25 years later.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suttress here. Here's a guy that I've known, good Lord, definitely over 10 years, maybe even 15 or so years. I went back to when he was running Emerald City. Jimmy Demonakos, good to see you, man.
Great to see you. Yeah, I was going to say this has to be probably a decade and a half at least at this point. So we're creeping up on that. We're creeping up on our 20th anniversary soon.
Next year is my podcast's 20th anniversary, Jim.
That's wild. That's wild.
Well, hey, man, and I've appreciated the help you've given me over the years. You know, it's funny. We're talking tonight about, and we'll talk about a lot of things, but one of the things is because people can stream The Art of Mike Mignola now, and tell them where they can stream it, Jim.
Yeah, so right now our documentary, which is called Mike Mignola Drawing Monsters, you can find it on Apple, Amazon, Vimeo, YouTube even. You can rent or buy it on any of those platforms. It was pretty crazy. Yeah, we released it on September 17th, and it was number one. It was the number one documentary on Apple, which was
amazing. Wow!
For 3 whole days.
Still,
you saw it go all the way up, and then now it's like, I don't know, number 19. But like, it's at least on there. You can still find it, and obviously, if you search for it everywhere, it's great. And the reception's been awesome. I mean, we're 100% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty incredible.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I just feel really. Just the feedback and the reception has been incredible. So I'm very, very grateful.
Is there a website still to order the DVD if people want a hard copy of it?
Nope. So the Blu-ray that we did was only part of our Kickstarter campaign. And then our current distributor, they're only doing digital right now. I'm not saying never for another copy of it, but for now, they very much are an all digital distribution.
I'm glad you found a distributor. I'm glad it's found a digital home right now that people can they buy it digitally or just rent it digitally?
Both.
Okay, great. Okay. And that's great, man. No, and you know how Amazon and Apple and all of the streamers are. It's like, hey, here's 25 things today that are brand new. So no, man, you're gonna get, a handful of days. And again, I'm so glad. You know what's funny, Jimmy? I was going to say, Franco goes, you got to have Demonakos on to talk about the Hellboy documentary. And I'm like, he goes, you had a whole Kickstarter. And I'm like, why didn't we do a word balloon? And then I looked back and I'm like, we did do a word balloon while the campaign was going on. And I put out like 4 episodes a week. And it's like, how many, a couple of years ago, what's the name of your co-director?
Kevin Conrad Hanna. So Kevin is my co-director. We could not be more 50-50 partners. I'll never be out there being like my documentary. It's always our documentary. It's so, it was such a labor of love, but also such a team effort that, we've both talked about how essentially like the team up, we couldn't have done it without each other. And so that's the best kind of team ups. We filled in those gaps for each other that we each didn't know. And then I learned so much, and I'm excited for us to, we've already started working on a couple of other documentaries, which is, I found this medium to be so exciting and so interesting because found a way to tell these really interesting stories in a very, in a way that like for us, I mean, you've seen the documentary, and for those who may not have, we actually made it very breezy. Like, you don't actually have to be some big Hellboy fan, some big Mignola fan. We introduce everything, even when it comes down to little things. Like, we don't want to assume you would know, or what an inker is. And so we, give you, I mean, in the funniest way possible, we still explain what an inker is, so that when Mike says, I was struggling as an inker, that makes sense to someone who doesn't know the hierarchy of comic production. Right. Not all of us, we're not going to sit there and be like, all right, so the person who did the flatting, under this, et cetera, et cetera. It's just because you get this glaze from people who don't know, and that's okay. And it's funny because some of the critics of the film are also like the biggest comic fans, because what they wanted, and this is a thing that actually like we fight against in the best way possible. What they really kind of wanted is this like Wikipedia the movie. Like, I want, like, you didn't mention this comic, you didn't talk about this thing that Mignola did and this thing. And it's like, yeah, because if we did that, we would make like a 10-hour maxi series about, this guy's been in comics already for 40 years. He started in the 80s and has been working on books consistently ever since. How are you going to fit 40 years worth of stuff into, and that was a challenge for us. We kept cutting and cutting and cutting. And like, I was introduced to Mignola with Fawford and the Grey Mouser. So the Howard Chaykin Epic Comics under Marvel back in the late 80s. That's the first time I discovered Mike Mignola. And I don't think we even mention it or show one of those covers in the documentary.
Nope. I watched it this afternoon, Jimmy. No, you do not. And that's fantastic. Again, I wanted to be fresh with my thoughts.
Right. And I love it. Clearly, like, I have such that it holds such a special place in my heart. And even that didn't make it in, because we're like, because we talked to Mike, and a lot of the decisions we made were based off of our conversations with Mike. Because if we said, hey, you worked on this book, let's talk about it, his response can go from, oh yeah, I worked on that, no big deal, to that was a pivotal moment in my creative life. That was our barometer of how we were going to talk about books.
Certainly.
And so we mentioned, because I mentioned it with Fawford, and he was like, oh, I loved working with Howard. It was great. Okay, well, moving on, right? Like, there's nothing bad about his response, right?
Of course not.
But it was just another cool thing he got to do, and then he moved on. Versus when we talked about Legends of the Dark Knight, like, that was like a pivotal book versus, I'll just keep using the example, but, versus Fawford.
Sure.
So that's what you focus on.
100%. Well, let him tell his stories and the ones that excite him. Absolutely. I think my Mignola exposure started with Cosmic Odyssey.
Okay.
And either that and I forget which was first. I think that was before Gotham by Gaslight. Maybe that was first.
I think, I think Gotham by Gaslight was after Cosmic Odyssey.
That's what I'm thinking.
I think so. But
and also his Death in the Family covers. That he did for, when they killed Jason Todd and everything.
Yes.
So that I saw and I appreciate it. But to really get into the interiors and stuff, I think it was Cosmic Odyssey. But no, you distill and really, we were talking off the air about the Alex Ross documentary, obviously a sponsor of Word Balloon currently. Now available on Kickstarter, everybody.
Now available on Kickstarter. Please back that as well. Like, I think we're all a family. And when I say that, it's like, I love Sal. And even if he wasn't, sponsoring, as it were, but for me, it's the more that you can show that there's a real appetite for comic documentaries, the better it is for all of us. Because the next time we go out there, we're probably going to be back on Kickstarter as well. asking the fans to help fund our projects because, you know, it took us over 2 years to get a distributor.
I believe it.
And it's not like, and, you know, they take their cut and, you know, they're like, it's going to be 6 months until you get your first check. You know, none of these things are like, oh, okay, now we're funded forever. It's like,
here's money.
Yeah. I mean, if someone out there wants to, you know, throw money at us to make documentaries, we'll happily do that. But in the current reality is we're going to have to finance part of it, go to Kickstarter, get the rest of it, finish it, deliver it, and then lather, rinse, repeat, you know?
I get it, Jim. Well, honestly, what I love about both Alex's documentary and the Mike documentary that you guys made, it really has a very professional quality, taking nothing away from the DIY guys that go out there and shoot stuff at conventions or whatever, and because those can be fantastic stories as well, truly. But again, you guys are going for that mainstream audience. You guys are going to the muggles. And look, I know all you know about comic books is maybe Peanuts, you know, whatever. But this guy's exceptional, especially if you're a horror fan and you're not aware of Mike. And this is why his stuff is great. And really just having not only Del Toro and his other collaborators, it was, you know, Ron Perlman, who me, Art, and Franco had the pleasure to meet when they were doing Itty Bitty Hellboy. And Perlman's like, oh, that's great. And he couldn't have been cooler one San Diego night. But yeah, man, it's bringing in these mainstream people and also getting the eyeballs on the Apples and the Amazons and stuff that, you know, maybe, again, you might hit somebody that doesn't know they're a comic fan and they'll see this documentary. And Mike's got a great story. It's a wonderful, wonderful story.
I think the thing about it too is that his story is so relatable to anybody who's in any kind of creative pursuit, right? And I think that's a big thing that we push, is because when people say like, oh, you made a comic book documentary, and it's like, yes, it is a comic book documentary also. But what we actually made was a documentary about creativity. Yes. So if you take Mike and you replace comics with fine art, with painting, with sculpting, and just take his exact story and do the same thing to it, it fits. It's someone who didn't find his feet necessarily in the mainstream and went off on his own and created the thing that he wanted to see in the world. And how many people who, you know, listen, as a kid, as a child of Greek immigrants, you know,
it's Greek to Greek tonight, kids. I was going to mention at the end of the show, but and again, Jimmy's got a Greek name, you know, and people are like, what's that twist? And it's like, yeah, whatever.
Listen, there's only a few of us in comics. You know this, you know, you got Eliopoulos, you got Chris Gage, you know,
and then the hidden
Doug
ones.
Mahnke.
I was going to say the hidden ones like Doug Mahnke, who's half Greek, and Tomasi is Greek, you know. And so no, you're right. I know, man. Believe me, at conventions, it's like, all right, Greek, good to see you.
Right, yeah, it's like this small group. But I think the interesting thing is, you know, for me, I had the kind of classic upbringing for a Greek immigrant is my parents were restaurateurs. They owned a restaurant.
Me too.
And I don't think you realize, like, it took me a long time as even into being a young adult, I would say, and actually probably even more when I finally decided to open my first comic book store. I didn't realize how just watching your parents not have a boss really changes your brain. Because I talked to my wife about this, you know, she grew up with, you know, her mom was an accountant, just, you know, let's call it classic 9 to 5, you know, went to college, got a degree, went and got a job, and is working that job. Yeah. And obviously there's nothing wrong with that. That is a completely legit path for a ton of people. When she talked to me about opening her own business, it took her a long time to get to that point. We can get into, my wife's got her own story, whatever.
No, but that's interesting. Please.
But what I thought about a lot was that I never had some kind of, what I'm trying to get at is, I never had some kind of barrier to think, oh, I can't be my own boss. And she did. She had this thing that was like, it feels like someone needs to give you permission, like that you need some degree, some certificate that says, nah, it's cool, you can be your own boss, right? Because of that was how she was brought up. And for me, because I never had that from a very young age, like I opened my first comic book store when I was 22.
Okay.
So I spent 3 years working in Seattle at the time, Amazon, you name it. The late 90s was tech boom. And I was a web designer. So I was making really good money in the tech industry. But instead of becoming a tech bro, which I guess I could have, and I would have a much different life, but I love my life, so I have no complaints. Instead, I took the money that I'd made in 3 years and used it as the down payment to open my first comic book store. So in 2000, I opened my first comic book store. And then in 2002, I opened my second comic book store. And in 2003, I started Emerald City Comic Con. Do you know what I mean? Like, and all of those things were just me saying, with this group of people that I'm with, it's like, well, why not me? Why not us? What's stopping me from starting a convention? Again, if you're waiting for someone to give you that permission, and even early on, I definitely had that kind of imposter syndrome of, there was another guy who was doing a comic book show here, a pretty small one.
In Seattle.
In Seattle, like 400 or 500 people. And he did it twice a year, and it was sort of the staple, right?
Sure.
And I used to set up at that show because as a comic book store owner, what's the best way to get rid of those 25-cent comics and those toys that you can't, ever get, if you can't sell? You buy a table for $75 and you toss all your stuff on there, let people dig through your quarter bins. Maybe one of the guys who's a more serious dealer at the end of the show might be like, I'll take all your comics for $100, just to, and so I would do these shows, and I got to know all the other dealers, of course, and I already knew a lot of the dealers because they were also just like the other comic book store owners in the Seattle area, right? And they would always complain about the show because it was kind of a little bit of a cookie cutter, same old kind of swap meet, church basement type show, right? But it was there, right? And I grew up going to it. So when I decided that it was like, it'd be great. I'd gone to San Diego Comic-Con. So this would probably be like 1994, 95. And around that same time, I'd done Wizard Chicago. And those two were pretty, good sized shows. I mean, people don't understand now what San Diego Comic-Con used to be. Like, everybody knows San Diego as it is now. Only if you were around back then do you realize, like, San Diego Comic-Con, like, you could still walk up and buy tickets and just wander in, and like, it was this whole thing. But even that was a much bigger show than what we had. Okay. And I was like, why don't we have something not San Diego size, but San Diego like, where it's like, we just have something bigger, better. And at that time, I had become friends with Eric Larson from Savage Dragon because I ran his website. I started when I was doing web design. I was doing like a fan website of Savage Dragon, and he found it. And this is so early on, again, going into the Wayback Machine into the early 90s, that he didn't have his own email address yet. And so, but his brother-in-law did. So he emailed me through his brother-in-law's email and told me that if I replied to his brother-in-law would print it out and fax it to him. right? So
Classic Luddite, Eric Larson. Absolutely. I've known that about him for years as well. Keep going. Great story.
a couple years later, he got an email address and emailed me directly, and basically was like, "Hey, you're already doing this fan site. I need an official website. Do you want to work on the official website?" I was like, "Sure." And so that's how I became like the webmaster for SavageDragon.com. So, and so when I opened my comic book store, within the first 2 months, I emailed Eric and was like, "Hey, if I fly you up to Seattle, would you do a signing at the shop?" And he's like, "Sure," because his family's up here. His family's up in Bellingham, which is north, kind of close to the Canadian border, right?
Okay.
Which is from here, like it's like a 2.5 hour drive, so it's not like that far, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so he's like, "Yeah, it's just an excuse to visit my family. I'll do this signing." And it took us 2 years, almost 2 years, to make more money in one day at the comic book store than we did at that signing. It like helped put the shop on the map, which was awesome. And then when it was time to start Emerald City, it was the same thing. I was like, "Hey, Eric, would you be willing to be I'm starting a convention." And you know what's funny is because there's only that one show up here, I would tell people like, "Hey, I'm doing a show in Seattle." And they're like, "Oh, I've done that one." I'm like, "No, you haven't. Like, it doesn't even exist yet. I want you to come to my first show." And they're like, "Oh, because there's this other one." I'm like, "Yeah, there is this other one, but I don't." And to be fair, I went to that guy who ran it, this guy, Steve. And I had originally approached him saying, "I want to do something bigger. Would you let me be part of your show?"
Sure.
I can bring you guests. I know a lot of people. I have ideas about advertising, the fledgling internet in 2002. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
All those things. And he said no. And I'm very glad that he did, obviously.
Sure.
Because, in retrospect, right?
Of course.
But it also put a little bit of that fire in my belly to be like, well, I guess I'm just going to do it myself. So, we put together the year one of Emerald City, and I did this thing where I actually, using the comic shop locator service, so shout out to Diamond and the comic shop locator service, I sat down and I put in all the zip codes along the I-5 corridor and found every comic book store, including tons that I never even knew about. Because listen, once you drive like an hour away from your house, you're in foreign territory, right? Like, I don't know every comic book store in this state. I know every comic book store in the city. I know every comic book store in probably like a 15, 20 mile radius, but that's it. We're talking, I'm going to go. And what I did is I made a map and I printed out flyers and a poster. And I drove the entire I-5 corridor and I handed out a poster and a stack of flyers to every comic book store from essentially Vancouver, BC to Portland, Oregon. And so when people were like, "What do you expect? What do you want for year one of Emerald City?" I was like, I would hope we could get 1,000 people, because my thought was like, can we double the amount of people who normally go to the other event by creating something new? Could we maybe create something? And in our first year, we ended up with 2,500 people. And that was the birth of Emerald City Comic Con.
That's beautiful, man. That's excellent. And yeah, man, I mean, good Lord. Reed owns Emerald City now.
Correct.
Do you still work with them in any capacity, or is that period over?
Not anymore. So
okay.
I finished consulting with them in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I sold in 2015, and then I was with them for another two and a half years.
Sure.
And no, 2017. Sorry.
Okay.
I took 2018 off, and then 2019 I started my other convention.
And I want to talk about Lightbox.
Yeah,
Let's talk about Lightbox, because again, this is a different animal from your regular what you'd expect at a comic convention, please.
Correct. I mean, so the similarities in that, in terms of, let's call it the layout, is that it has an artist alley and it's got booths and it has panels. And that is like, let's call it the surface similarities to a Comic-Con. So if you walk in, you're like, I get it. There's the artists, there's the people selling stuff. And then, we have a different building, and that the other building has all the panel rooms. The difference is that the artist alley is kind of who you'll find there. There are comics people there. Like, year one, we had actually Mignola was there. And then, Cheeks has been there, and Dustin.
Oh, great.
And,
John Galloway.
Like comics people that you would know, right?
Sure.
But they make up, like there's 10 or 15 of them, and that's it. The rest of the artist alley, which has like 250 tables, it's all made up of artists who are working in the entertainment art industry. So by that, I mean, they could be animators, they could be video game concept artists, they could be storyboard artists, live action, costume designers, you name it. And so what we've created is a show that's all about the people who create the pop culture that all of us consume. So what we say is that we help you meet the people behind your favorite things. Like, you might love BB-8 from Star Wars, but like there's a person who created BB-8, and you can meet them there and put a name to the people that actually put together the things that we all love. And so even like, we've got the concept guys like Ryan Meinerding, who is the main concept artist for the head of concept for the MCU, right?
Yeah. I actually I moderated a panel with him, and all he did was just show slides of his concept paintings. Yeah. And I'm reasonably certain, obviously, when they do the MCU big coffee table art books, that's all Ryan. I mean, it's folks.
It's a lot of it is Ryan. Yeah.
Oh yeah, exactly. A lot of it is, and it's so funny because I'm like, can I record this for my podcast? He goes, video, and I'm like, yeah. He's like, no, and I'm like, okay, and no problem. Yeah, I'm like, it's your panel, man. Yeah, and exactly. I go, I do the audio, but it really we're really watching the slides, man. So it really doesn't translate. But no, I love him, and he's
not much of a podcast.
Glad you mentioned
the audio version of a slideshow is not super exciting. I get that.
Unless I put in those grade school beeps between the beep,
But speaking of Ryan, actually, that's just a perfect example. But also, just to throw out a shout out, they did release, either it just came out or it's coming out this month. There's an actual Ryan Meinerding MCU art book. And
wonderful. Good.
It's incredible. He had it with him at San Diego to show just the comp copy. And like I said, I think it's actually out in October. So
I'm going to hit you up for his email, because I'd love to have him on. And if I can now finally show images, we can actually do a word balloon and help him sell the book, hopefully.
There you go.
So yeah, man. No, that's great to hear. No, I'm very happy about that.
That's what Lightbox is all about. It's all about the people behind the pop culture that we're all about. And
all right, I'm going to ask you questions, but first I want to acknowledge some of the people that are chiming in. First of all, a participant in the Mignola documentary, and another guy that works very much in the Hellboy universe, Mike Oming, saying, hey, I'm literally inking some BPRD pages right now. Thank you for this amazing documentary, Jim. Congratulations. Which is very
thanks,
cool.
Mike was awesome. He was one of the he was actually within the first 3 people we ever talked to for the Mignola documentary. So he was there literally from the beginning. Huge supporter. I've known Mike for years. I have a quick Mike Oming story just to give him an extra shout out. One of my favorite things I got to do while I ran Emerald City is actually sit down with Mike, and he designed with just my chicken scratch input, but he designed the mascots for Emerald City Comic-Con, and they still use the same designs that were designed by Mike are still the Emerald City Comic-Con Crusader and Crusaderette. The two mascots that even now Reed uses were designed by Mike Oeming. And it was such a fun time to go with him and draw on his drawings and get him to like actually create those characters. So love you, Mike.
I love you too, Mike. And yeah, I got to collaborate with Mike on his Art of Mike Oeming Dark Horse book, and I did the interview that is the text for the book and stuff. So no, Mike, and I was telling another friend the other day, I've known Mike since 2006, that first New York show where the fire marshal closed down the room. And we were all just kind of circling like the Convention of the Damned. It was just this. It wasn't as big as it is now at the Javits Center. It was only in a couple of the rooms. And Bendis took pity on me, and he and I knew each other by then. He's like, "Hey man, sit with us." And it was Brian, Mike, and Mac, David. And my God, it was so great. And that's where I really got to know David and Mike even more, and become an even better friend with Brian. So no, I love those guys, all three of those guys. So yeah, and Mike knows it. So anyway, but also here a couple other people. Nice things about the documentary. Doc is brilliant, says Jason. So inspiring, and it makes you want to hit the drawing board. And then he also says, it also made me buy a hardcover of Iron Wolf by Chaykin and Mignola before it gets any more expensive.
Nice.
And Pete Meiser.
Another one, right? Like, Iron Wolf, like, again, never even mentioned it. Amazing book. Yeah, absolutely. And Pete Meiser, I think, was pointing to your career evolution and says, yeah, man, the sky's the limit. So very cool. But yeah, so Lightbox, is it half fans that are like, they appreciate, below the line, or is it a networking opportunity for people that want to get in the biz, or both? How would you categorize the people that go to Lightbox? So, we did a lot of, what do you call it? Like post-show surveys.
Sure.
Asking people like, how do you identify? And what we found is that it's split pretty evenly, like about 30% students, 30% aspiring professionals, 30% working professionals, and about 7 to 8% just fans. So the fan level is actually kind of low. But the interesting part of the event is that every single person that you talk to is probably an artist of some level, whether they are, working at Disney or DreamWorks or Illumination or anything in the animation world, or they're a student trying to get in. They're all artists. And so that's the incredible vibe that Lightbox has that's so different from any other event. Like, I used to say this when I worked at Reed. My favorite show was actually, outside of Emerald City, of course, was Star Wars Celebration. Because there's something really cool about the Star Wars show, because when you talk to any single person, there's that same foundation of what they're there for. They're there for Star Wars. Now, are they a fan of the Clone Wars, the original, the new, the whatever? It doesn't matter, because at the very base level, everybody is a Star Wars fan.
Certainly.
And so the vibe you get from that is like, I love conventions, obviously. Like, you go to San Diego. San Diego is awesome, but you could talk to 30 different people or 30 people, and you get 30 different answers on why they're there.
I say that all the time.
One answer. It's just, are they there for comics? Are they there for celebrities? Are they there for
anime?
Anime?
I say the same thing, Jimmy. Yes, I literally say the same. Or the hidden academic room. So everybody that's getting their PhD writing their dissertations about comics. No, I love that about San Diego, but you're right. I always say the same thing, and I would see people cosplaying as their favorite anime characters or whatever run by, and I'm there for obviously all the comic stuff and comic history stuff and whatever, and it's like we're all having a different experience right now. You're absolutely right. So continue, please.
No, of course. It's just, and I love that because everyone is expressing their fandom in their own way, right? Like, I've never cosplayed. That's totally fine, but I can appreciate cosplay. I can appreciate good cosplay, etc. But that's not for me, and that's okay.
Of course.
And so going back to what we created with Lightbox, so just to be clear, I created it with Bobby Chu. So Bobby's my partner in that show. Bobby is a concept artist. He is the best known for the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland films. He helped design most of the creatures in those films.
Sure.
And he's worked on everything. Most recently, he did the Super Mario Brothers movie, the animated one. So he and I run this event. He runs a thing called Schoolism. Schoolism is an online school for you to learn art. And he's been doing it. It was one of the first online schools, and he still does it. So when we came up with our concept for Lightbox, every one of those 13 panel rooms we have are all educational. You go in there, it's not just someone showing a trailer and then talking about it. You have to actually, basically our general idea is that if someone goes to see something at Lightbox, they should walk away having learned something.
Understood.
And that's kind of the base level of what it is. Now, what that is, that's up to, each studio, you name it, each person. But that's what Lightbox is. So it's just a much different experience. But I also will say, in terms of just curation, it's one of the coolest artist alleys I've ever had a pleasure to be part of, because for example, this year we had over 1,300 applications for 250 tables.
Wow.
But the other thing that we do is we have a model where if you had an artist alley table last year, you only have a 20% chance of getting a table the next year. So that every year, the artist alley is 80% different.
Wow.
So what we want is especially for the people who come year over year, to have a new experience, but also even more importantly is to make room for new artists to be able, because the way that our criteria are, and the people, we have a whole committee who helps judge the applications, is we want to make sure that it's not a closed ecosystem. There's people who, because we don't look at like your social media following, we look at your art. And if your art is good, you have a chance of getting a table. And so we want to be able to allow for the new people who are breaking into the industry to have just as much an opportunity as people who have been in it for 20 years.
I get it. And I think that's really smart. And I know that along with technology evolving, art is evolving because of it. And it is great to have people like that are really at the forefront and everything, that are trying new things and succeeding. No, that's incredibly democratic. And I think our ancient ancestors would appreciate the democracy of that kind of pecking and stuff. No, I think that's great, man. Here's something from B Things. B Things or 8 Things? Short eyeballs. Star Wars Celebration was so fun. I went for exactly the reasons Jim said. There you go, man. And actual Dracula joining us. Good evening.
Good evening.
No, that's great, Jim. So the school component, not only what your partner brings, but also does he bring certain schools in? Do you have any sort of like relationship with some of the art schools then in your area? And like, hey, I'd love to bring my kids, can I get in that way? I mean, you tell me how it works from an academic standpoint.
So, and just so we're clear, the show is in Pasadena. It's not up here in Seattle. So
okay.
It's down near the animation hub.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
And every studio is there. In terms of schools, there are some schools who sponsor and then do our part of the show. And there are some schools that, like, if they're like, hey, we want to bring a bunch of students, we'll give them like a student discount.
I was wondering, yeah.
A big group, but
sure.
Because we want it to be as accessible as we can for as many people as possible. Yeah. But last year we had almost 15,000 people. So it's, it's grown like, that was year 5. So this is year 6. And it was one of those things where, we launched it in 2019 and then the pandemic happened. So when it was like 2020 and 2021, we actually moved it online.
Okay.
And then came back in person starting in 2022. But
tell me about your experience with that, because, I ran a couple online shows during the pandemic as well, or I should say I co-ran them with my partners. But sure. Hey man, well, kind of like you when you were setting up Emerald City, I'd been doing word balloons for like 16 years, and I'm like, telling, like we did it for Baltimore among our independent shows as well. And it's like, hey, how about Bendis and Jerry Conway have a conversation? And
Right.
and the Baltimore guys, you could do that. I'm like, yeah. How about Dave Gibbons and Tom King talking about Rorschach because Tom was doing his Rorschach thing? You could do that. I'm like, well, they're my friends. Yeah. I'm like, and again, it's like, it was nice. And it really was a validation, as I'm sure it was for you in the evolution of both shows, Emerald City and Lightbox and everything. But 15,000 people, that's great. That is so. When is the next one?
October 25th. So,
oh my God, Jim, a couple weeks away. Holy shit! I'm sorry, buddy. Jesus, I mean, and I really appreciate you talking to me so close to the show and everything.
No problem. Yeah, I am. I'm in the thick of it right now. It's coming up. Yeah, it's crazy, but I'm really excited.
Tell us of some highlights of this year that you're excited about.
So for this year, I think one of the coolest things we have going on is Nick Park, the creator of Wallace and Gromit.
Love his stuff. Oh my God,
first time.
Wonderful claymation animator, people. Wallace and Gromit, Chicken Run.
Yeah,
it's a movie that Nick did. Yeah, I mean, really brilliant British animator. Absolutely, please. That's great. Yeah. Wow. Hey, get me Nick Park and I'll promote Lightbox even more, man.
No, it's
all right. I'm kidding. Kidding.
No, you're all good. It's just one of those things where, like for example, we've got Doug Chang, who is the lead. Oh, he's a VP at Lucasfilm, but he's the lead concept artist for Star Wars. So
wonderful.
Period.
Wow.
And
sure.
He's going to be sitting in conversation with Neville Page. Neville being the concept artist on Star Trek. So there's a cool dynamic there because of Star Trek, Star Wars, but they're both seasoned professionals. And so a lot of that kind of stuff. We're very interested in kind of seeing those kind of conversations between artists and talking about what their experience is and how they can help the next generation from what they've learned coming into the art world now. Yeah. I don't want to take up too much time talking about Lightbox. It's just one of those things. Check it out if you're interested. Lightboxexpo.com. It's in Pasadena. Our full programming schedule. So we've got over 200 panels over the weekend. So ton of programming, big artist alley. And then every studio is also there hiring, or sorry, let me not actually say that they are hiring. They're always there talking to people and talking about how to get jobs in the industry. So
good.
But every major studio, so the whole Disney company is there, including ILM Immersive and even Disney Imagineering, along with the studios. And Pixar and 20th and all that. And then
our buddies at Titmouse, are they over there?
Yep, Titmouse is there. Cool. I'm actually really excited. Titmouse this year. So we have these 3 mascots for our convention, and this year Titmouse is doing the opening animation.
Fun
for featuring the mascots. That'll be super cool. And then like a lot of other studios, Leica and like I said, Skydance, DreamWorks, you name it. So if that's your interest, then that is a show that you should definitely check out.
So, October 25th?
October 25th through 27th.
Wonderful. So, that's excellent. And lightboxexpo.com.
Correct.
Excellent. Very good. I wanted that for the audio, so that's excellent. And are you able, or have you posted past panels? Do you have like a YouTube channel where people?
So we have if you go to Lightbox, if you go to youtube.com/lightboxexpo, we release one new panel every single week for free on YouTube.
Wonderful.
So we record not all of them, but we record a few of the rooms at the show, and then we release the panels up onto YouTube every week, so that people not only can get, because again, we don't want education to necessarily be behind a gate. Like obviously you pay to come to the show, etc. But like at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff that we post is very educational, is worth listening to, worth checking out. And so we want to be able to allow access to it to as many people as we can. So
that's great.
So yeah, it's been a really cool show to run and to be part of a much bigger community there as well. So, and of course, the Venn diagram of like comics people and animation people. It's a huge crossover.
Big portion of the Mignola documentary is Mike's work in animation, things that didn't make it, but exist, like Amazing Screw-On Head and things like that, or even the conceptual art that they were trying to make, which I love that story about of all people, Fabio. We'll leave it at that, and people's imagination will go and they can watch the movie. But also his work on Atlantis.
Yeah.
It's the Disney film, the Disney anime film. Also, one of my good friends, Tad Stones. And I know he did the Hellboy animation. That was my entree to getting Mike on the show. Tad is like, hey man, I've been listening to Word Balloon. I made these, animated Hellboy shorts. Love to come on. I could probably get you Mike. I'm like, yes to both, please. And it was terrific, and Mike's been on a few times over the years, and I always say hi to him when we're both at the same show. But no, truly, man, it's back to the documentary for a second. Sure. It really. You did a great job, and I love the talking heads in it, and it really is great to see the other wrinkles of Mike. The other thing that everyone has to remember, and sometimes it's like you forget this, but you guys point out, really outside of DC and Marvel, probably the biggest known comic book hero is Hellboy because of the movies, and really interesting to hear the Mignola Del Toro dynamic, everything about it, and I think you guys cover it in a very honest way, where collaborators are, it isn't always, everything's great, we love everything that each of us are doing. And it's interesting to hear the differences in philosophies both guys had to the Hellboy concept and stuff. No, again, another really interesting wrinkle about the documentary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what was interesting too is that they're both far enough removed from it to have a good perspective on it. Because I think when you have those clashes of personality, then it becomes personal because you are so invested in your idea. But what we found is that they were very honest. And I think, again, like, time gives you perspective. They're very honest about what their relationship is now and how it's actually quite healthy now, but that there's times when it wasn't. And so I really appreciated that that they both were open enough with us to tell us exactly actually, why things didn't work and what some of the challenges were. And so I really appreciated that. It was nice to, get those talking heads, like you said, but also that they were willing to really open up and not just, it wasn't like you said, everything was great and platitudes. Instead, it was like, there was some messy stuff that we went through. And, Mike said, like, it was an experience that I, will cherish. And for him, the movies are all about his experience in making the movies. Like he said, he can't be objective about them because they're too close, but he can love that they exist and love the time that they were made. And and Del Toro was the same, where he said, essentially, like, we had great times and no one can take that away from us. And we made those movies and no one can take that away from us. And so I think that was really cool. Like, there was so much stuff that we really enjoyed, not only discovering thanks to these interviews, but also because we did the research in advance to know some of the stories, to be able to ask them very specific questions to get these answers and to be able to help create and work through the narrative. And the thing that you said about, Hellboy outside of Marvel and DC, I don't think he said it on camera, but we were talking to Jorge Gutierrez, who's an animator. He's an Emmy award-winning animator, Maya and the Three and The Book of Life. And he is a big Mignola fan and is in there, especially in talking about the animation. But the thing that he said, he's like, if you think about it, there's a certain generation and a couple generations now that Hellboy has always existed, right? Like, John, you and I lived in a time before Hellboy, right? That's fine.
Of course.
But there's a certain, like, if you were born anytime after 1994, which would make you 30 already.
Right.
Hellboy has always existed. He is just a character. There's Superman, there's Spider-Man, and there's Hellboy. Like,
Absolutely.
you know, there's obviously all these other ones, but in general, it's like, oh, he's just another character that has always been around for people.
Yes.
And that's pretty incredible if you think about it. Because
100%.
there's very few, you know, like if we want to talk about Marvel, for example, in the last 30 years, you know, I would say Deadpool and like Miles Morales are probably the two biggest characters. Miss Marvel, the Kamala Khan, you know, like
certainly,
and Ironheart and a couple other, you know,
we'll see. But I think you're right about. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I think you're right about Deadpool though, and Miles. Maybe Rocket Raccoon and Groot because of the success of Guardians. But you're right. And on the DC side, Harley Quinn, and I don't know who else.
Right. I would say Harley Quinn, possibly the new Blue Beetle. If we're just talking about people they've made movies of, right?
Yeah,
right? But like,
also,
there's not a lot of characters that have been created. What I'm getting at is that there's not a lot of characters that have been created in the last 30 years that have made such an impact in pop culture.
Correct.
Especially to the level, again, arguably that Hellboy has.
Agreed.
You know, Hellboy's not bigger than Deadpool. That's fine. But if you want to cut the time off at 1994, he's a top 3. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's crazy.
Well, and I would say I don't know who's bigger in terms of other characters. Like, I know Hellboy's bigger than Jaime Reyes' Blue Beetle.
Sure.
And again, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's too early. No, again, I mean, Harley Quinn, okay, fine. Again, there's a reason why they made the animated series and stuff. It's like, no, it's a no-brainer. People know who Harley Quinn is already. It took 30. And in fact, as we're talking, the second Joker movie coming out this weekend.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Folie les deux. It's like, all right, you know, calm down. Just call it Joker 2 and shut up. But we'll see. Maybe there's a reason why in the movie that the title is as fancy as it is. But what else is going on, Jimmy? What do you got coming up?
So
that you can talk about.
Isn't that always the problem, right? Like, sure. What you can talk about. So I guess for now, I'll go with, I've got Lightbox coming up, and then I just did a fun short story with Scott Morse. So Scott Morse has been doing this great book. He's been posting all these little teasers. He does these one-page stories.
I'm glad he's back in comics again.
Yeah, it's been a while. Like, my last graphic novel came out in, oh my gosh, like 2012. So I mean, it's been a very long time. But you know, I got caught up in conventions and documentaries, and but they're all different creation, right?
Let me zoom in, because another thing you did that everybody who was smart and got involved in the Kickstarter and got your fantastic spinner rack, which hey man, you know, I mean, that was a big part of our childhood. And I know a lot of people that have spinner racks that they've bought, they've been able to find on eBay, the old stuff. But man, yours is like the Cadillac of spinner racks, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was so much fun to do this too, because like that spinner rack was, what's funny is the spinner rack was actually like a little bit of a, let's call it a bridge project, because it was after I left Reed, but before I decided to start Lightbox.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what I should do. I was just trying to like think about, and I'd had so many conversations, because it really started with like, I want to buy one, but I don't want to pay $800 for like a rusted out one on eBay. You know what I mean? And so, and I was just like, you know, it's just bent metal. Like, how hard is this to do? And you know, I ended up manufacturing them in New Jersey. Like, literally, there's a guy who did, you know, wire. And so what I ended up doing is buying a classic one. I did end up finding one. It was like $500, whatever.
All right.
I bought one, and I literally sent it to him and was like, this is what I want to make, but here's the changes I want to make. And so then I basically just kind of, for myself, improved the things that I didn't like about it. And so where it's like, oh, I want multiple ball bearings so it doesn't it spins really easy. Like, just like small stuff. And I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to sit around and be like, I invented the greatest system. It's like, no, man, like I just was like, hey, you make this kind of stuff. How do I make it so that when you load it down, because when you put all those books on the rack, it becomes very heavy. Right.
Okay.
As anybody who's ever moved a bunch of short boxes or long boxes around knows, like that adds up. And so I was like, you're going to put a lot of weight on here. So when you spin it, I want it to still spin as smooth as possible.
Yeah.
And so we did this multiple ball bearing, thing. Anyway, so and it was just like a fun thing to do. And I was what was really interesting and cool to me, I think, is that a bunch of comics professionals were the ones that were most excited about it. Like Brian Bendis bought one, and then he bought, because I made them in white and black.
Okay.
White being the classic color,
of course,
that you used to find everywhere, and then black for the people who are like, I want something a little snazzier maybe, or whatever. And I was like, and what's funny is that I ended up selling about 50-50. Like, people really liked both. So it wasn't like one was dominant over the other. It was like, no, people were just like, yeah, I like this one, or I like this one. Anyway. And so, Brian, and he ended up buying a second one in a different color because Elisa wanted one.
Fantastic.
And so I was like, that's awesome. And then, I think just to bring it all back around perfectly, you did a great job. I know you're a professional. Walking in the first time to interview Mignola, he had the spinner rack, my spinner rack, in the background, and I was like, I didn't even place it. Like, I don't even sell them anymore, so I can't even get like.
I was gonna say, I know, man. That's
like, hey, look, and like cut a whole commercial just to be like, just zooming in on that rack. But it was so funny to walk into his place. And it was there, and it happened multiple times. Like I went to when we interviewed Mike Carlin, like he has one, and it's just really funny to me how many comics people, because of course those are the people who have the right nostalgia for it, and just like me, it's like you grew up with them, like no one's bending my comics. I'm the one who's on there, but it's so cool to go over there and grab, and I do it all the time. Every time I get a new shipment, because these days I mostly buy trades. I just don't have the time to do the monthlies. And so when it gets collected, I usually grab trades. And so I'll get like a stack of trades, and then I put them on there. And then little by little, I'll just go through and be like, cool, I've read this. And then it moves off the rack. And so the rack is also my to read list as well, which is perfect.
Well, that's what it's there for. Absolutely, man. The current books. Do you have special sections for wider, say a black and white magazine that somebody had? Would it be able to fit in the rack, or was there just a uniform classic kind of,
So I made it essentially like a silver sized rack, because it was silver and above, but not bronze. And then, but eventually, I did a deal with CGC, and I made a CGC sized rack. So you can actually put your graded books in there.
Wow. Yeah.
But the cool thing about that is also you can fit magazines and other larger hardcovers.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
In the CGC rack as well. So it kind of ended up being a little bit of a multi-use for
multimedia,
bigger books.
Different formats. Sure. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Absolutely, man.
It was so fun. Yeah.
Hilarious.
And I just reached out to CGC, because, I knew all the guys over there, because they would always come out to Emerald City and all this. And I was just like, hey, basically, I just want to do a simple licensing deal. And you guys, can I make a rack and call it a CGC rack? And they said, we don't want you to call it a CGC rack. You can call it a graded rack. A graded comics rack, but we'll totally promote it with you and all this other stuff. And anyway, they were awesome. So
great.
So I did that, and then eventually, I got into Lightbox and all this other stuff, and I just got so busy. And eventually, once I did and actually the manufacturer of the racks closed during
COVID,
during the pandemic.
Sure. Wow, that sucks.
And at that point, I was like, okay, I'll just sell the rest of what I have inventory, because at the time I didn't want to make them overseas. I was
of course, no, I understand.
Something cool to, like, made in the USA, support local jobs,
absolutely,
you name it, but also kind of easier for quality control. Like, I literally flew out to New Jersey and they walked me through, you know what I mean? Like, it was cool. And
Mr. Demonakos, this is the prototype. All right. But you have to put this special suit on. It's like Seinfeld's Pop-Tart movie, man. You gotta very NASA-esque and everything. All right, here's the comic rack, Mr. Demonakos.
Exactly. Here's the one. Here's the thing.
Mach 1.
Yeah, man. It was fun. Like,
that's cool, man.
I just like making cool stuff. And I think has been a thing that I've repeated throughout. Like, I opened a comic book store specifically because I used to go to, like 4 or 5 different shops to find what I wanted. And I just was like, I don't understand why there can't be one store that has comics and graphic. I mean, you have to understand, again, like, now going back into like my old man hat, in the early 2000s, there was places where we're like, oh yeah, well, no, we don't carry trade paperbacks.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yep. I remember.
And like others that are like, well, we don't do apparel. We don't do back issues. We don't do this. We don't do that. And I was like, well, I don't get that. So how about I just open a store that I can do all of the things that I know other people also want to do. And that's how that shop came around. And then Emerald City came around because it's like, well, why can't we have a show here that has lots of great guests and cool programming and this? And like, why? And we haven't even talked, not that I don't want to stay on forever, but like, I worked at Image, and then I did Kirby Crackle, like the whole a nerd rock band. I like,
yes.
Like, why doesn't this kind of music exist? All right, I'll make it. Why doesn't this thing, like, why don't these racks exist? Fine, I'll make it. And like, why isn't there a good animation convention and that's also educational? Okay, I'll do that. And now, like, most recently in this kind of like series of what has become a very cyclical part of my life, it's like, the whole Mignola documentary started with a conversation with Kevin being like, I don't understand why there aren't good comic documentaries about these creators who have made such an impact on pop culture and just even on our lives. And essentially it became, well, no one else is doing it, so why don't we do it? And then that's how we did it. And the next thing we're going to do is going to be the exact same thing. Is going to be, why didn't this thing exist? I guess we'll make it exist. And that's I think, a pretty lovely way to be. That's
excellent, Jim. No, that's why I started Word Balloon. I wasn't the first. There were other comic, even radio shows and things like that. But I would listen to them and I'd be like, I don't know. I'm surprised they didn't ask about X or Y. And I'm like, well, Jesus, I'm a broadcaster. I have been doing interviews since, the mid 80s, for God's sake. Let me get into this and then see what I can do. And yeah, like I said, next year's my 20th. So I understand. But I appreciate the diversity of your various endeavors. And I really, honestly, man, and I think you succeed. Everything you've touched, Jim, whether it's Emerald City, Lightbox, and the spinner rack, and this great documentary and stuff. No, you're killing it, dude. And I'm glad you want to make more, which is great to hear. And we'll I'm sure when those Kickstarters and things are ready, we'll talk about that stuff. Oh, that's nice. Jikuroho wishing me a happy yes, almost, man. May 10th. So we got a while. We just had 19.
We're getting there.
Yeah. Sadly, you're right. It is almost a half year away. But it's it'll be a fun year. But no, Jim, no, that's great. And what's the name of the project with Scott Morse? Is it out yet, or is it still?
No, it's called This Ink Runs Cold, and I think he's going to have it out next year. But if you follow Scott on Instagram, which I think it's Crazy Morse on Instagram, he's been posting sneak peeks, and he's been working with some incredible people, and also me.
That's awesome. That's cool. I don't know if you can answer this question that actual Dracula has, because maybe it's not ready to talk about what the next comic book documentary would be. But if you were to do one about another comic creator, who would be your first choice? Or should we say, do you have someone in mind? And let's leave it at that. It's up to you, Jimmy.
So we already have a couple in the works. And so unfortunately, I can't talk about it because I think the answer... My answer would also be literally the thing that we're trying to do. And so I'll just have to wait until next year for us to talk about it.
Well, a good excuse for us to talk then. But truly, man, I really, if there's a reason to talk before the end of the year, I'm happy to do it as well.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you, man.
Always, Jim. No, come on, man. Truly, you've always been good to me. When I've needed stuff and everything, and at the least I can do, because we are part of this community. I always say, I'm not in comics, I cover comics. I said the same thing when I did sports for 20 years. It's like, no, I'm not in sports, I cover sports. There's a difference. But again, enough of a familial feeling with all of you that I am friends with, that anything I can do to help. Oh, God, yeah. Oh, G. Corojo is hoping that perhaps some, and you don't have to comment on this, but interesting choices on his part: Dave Sim, Steranko, or Paul Galassi. I love Paul. Well, I've never met Dave Sim, but I thankfully have a good relationship with Steranko, and Paul Galassi has been very kind to me the times we've met each other as well, and even gifted me a great Batman Ra's al Ghul page from one of his prestige format books.
Oh, cool!
That's awesome. Oh, come on! You know,
as you can see, I'm a big. I love original art as well. Like,
you want to say what you got on the wall there?
Yeah. So this is. Man, I'm so bad at this.
No, it's all good. There you go.
So this is a Space Ghost cover by Alex Ross.
Wow.
So Space Ghost Alex Ross. This is a little cell from the old Fantastic Four animated. Is
that the '90s show or the Hanna-Barbera one?
No, the first one you said, not the
'90s one. Yeah,
the '90s one.
Cool.
It's him talking on the phone. My wife, the Thing is my favorite Marvel character, and so I think I've got another. There we go. Chris Uminga.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then this is a Gil Kane Green Lantern cover.
Wow.
And then above it, if I can,
there you go.
That's John Romita Jr. Man Without Fear.
Oh my God, very cool.
And then next to that is the cover to my graphic novel, The Silence of Our Friends. I bought it from and this is actually like a little Dr. Seuss old fish. It's like a little drawing of, one fish, two fish, old fish, new fish. So
outstanding.
Yeah, just stuff like that. And all right. And then
cool stuff, man. All right, hold on. I'm gonna zoom back out in a second.
There you go.
Yeah. But no, that's great. That's great, Jimmy. No, beautiful stuff, man.
Thank
Interesting
you.
Stories. And yeah, man. No, next time we can talk about your Image years and Kirby Crackle and the greatest hits of
the continuing history of Jim Demonakos.
A Greek epic. It's time has come. I'll do the voiceover for the trailer when it's the Jimmy Demonakos story. Who's gonna play you in? Maybe. Oh, we can. Well, he's got to slim down. We need Andy Milonakis can do the Jim Demonakos story. Got to be a Greek, man. Dimitri Martin, maybe he could do it.
That's right. You can't get this nose right if you don't have like the right culture.
And Jim, I've told you, no, we both have restaurant families, man. It's in our blood. We can't I always said it was living the myth, living the stereotype. It's all right.
Yeah. Oh, people, especially after my Big Fat Greek Wedding came out, like that was, everybody was like, that's you. I'm like, there's a lot of truth in there. I mean, like she had that experience. I mean, there's a very, to be honest, the one thing, and it's not like I would change it, but like the one thing they were talking, people would always ask about the Windex. And I'm like, no, that was a her family thing, but everything else, like the weird school lunches and the shit that you always got, like that was all just part of life, man.
Or Easter, we get the red eggs, and everyone's got the great multicolored rainbow eggs and stuff. Why are all your eggs red? Because it's the blood of Christ. Have you never heard that story? And it's like, wow, that's a downer. It's like, yeah, how you doing? Welcome to Greek Orthodoxy.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's like they stoned him and it has like blood on it. You're like, oh, that's actually kind of fucked up.
Exactly, man. Yeah. Happy Easter, everyone. Hope you get the coin. Christos Anesti. Hope you get the coin in the bread.
Alithos Anesti. Oh, God.
And honestly, I hate to admit it, I'm a terrible Greek. I know so little of the language, and I think there's a little osmosis. When I was a little kid, the older relatives would speak to me in like English and Greek, and I even when they would go Greek, I knew what they were talking about, and it's like, all right, but I think unfortunately, the decades of comic book reading have weighed upon my head as far as my secondary language lessons of Greek and everything. So
yeah, I feel lucky that I speak. I speak. I wouldn't say, I was going to say fluently, but I'll say conversationally.
That's good. No, that's.
I still talk like when I talk to my parents, it's always in Greek. And
beautiful.
So,
what part of Greece were they from?
So my dad is from Petalidi, which is outside of Sparta, and my mom is from Peristeri, which is outside of Athens.
We had relatives in Sparta, and my family was more Tripoli. And that's where they were. And I don't know and really, I'm a geographic knucklehead, so I don't know how close Tripoli is to Sparta. But I always tell this story, and I don't think I've ever told you this. My dad's older sister, and she was in her 80s when 300 came out, and she's like, "I want to see the Greek movie," and we'd seen Troy, and that was okay because it was big budget and all the big name actors and everything in it. But 300, and I'm like, 300, and she's like, yes, and I'm like, Anita, it's kind of a comic book movie. And I go, also, it's an R-rated movie. There might be nudity. And she said, well, I'm no prude. And I'm like, no, I know. But, and then she punched me in the gut. And she went, hey, this movie is about Sparta. This movie is about us. And I'm like, we're going to see the movie. And she loved it. When Ganesh, the Persian elephant-headed god, is attacking the Spartans, I'm like, you're all right with that? She's like, oh, no, we learned this story in Greek school. And I'm like, and her hard-boiled construction working son is like, I don't want to see that movie. It's too violent. I'm like, well, your mom loved it, man. I don't know how to break it to you. So, I mean, man, cool old Greek lady,
I cheated because my geography is a little sparse, but I Googled while you're telling your story, and Sparta is only a 1 hour drive to Tripoli. So Tripoli is north of Sparta. Sure. So yeah, they're both down there in the Peloponnesus.
Close. Very cool. Well, there you go. Then my aunt was right. That's beautiful. Oh, G. Kuro says his mother's father was from Chios, Greece.
Chios. Oh, cool.
Very cool, man. That's great.
We're everywhere.
It's Australia. My God, tons of Greeks in Australia.
I have family in Australia as well.
Too.
Yeah.
Me too.
It's like if you need anywhere where you put it together a bunch of hooligans and you need Greek people and Australians, it's perfect.
That's very true. That's
considering that's where they sent all the prisoners. I mean, yeah, that's it tracks.
As Bill Murray says in Stripes, our forefathers were kicked out of every decent country in Europe, and it's like pretty much, man.
Did you know that actually that Australia has the second largest population of Greeks outside of Greece?
Yes, I did know. And again, because you always hear these fantastic names of Australians and stuff that have Greek names and everything. So yeah, God, even General Hospital, the bad guy that John Colicos played, Makos Castadine, as Robert Scorpio with his Australian accent would say, Makos Castadine. So, amazing. Yeah, man.
Amazing.
All right, that was excellent. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the Greek Comic Hour is now over.
That's right.
We hope you enjoyed
joining us.
Absolutely, and yes, we will stay tuned for the Hungarian Hour, which follows immediately on this foreign language channel. Did you have a decent in the Seattle market? Did you guys have a decent like UHF channel where they'd have the Greek Hour or whatever? We had it in Chicago.
No,
too bad.
Listen, we just didn't have even now. Like, there's not much of a Greek population out in Seattle. Like, Chicago obviously is huge. Like, I loved every time I would come to Chicago, we'd go to Greek town, and
100%.
There's an actual Greek town. Here it's like we have one church.
Nice. That's nice.
Now there's two. Like, there's one tiny one and there's one big one. And the only time you'd see other Greek people would be like during the festival, like once a year,
sure,
or for all the terrible Orthodox who would go only for Easter or Christmas. And so
the bad Greeks, yes.
And so it just, to me, I grew up here, and like in school there was one Greek kid, in the whole. You know what I mean? Like it just wasn't, and he wasn't very nice. And I was like, well, I guess my chance to have one Greek friend that's not my brother is just not going to happen. So, anyway,
well, now we got Christos Gage and Doug Monkey and Pete Tomasi and Iliopoulos.
Chris Iliopoulos.
There are actually two. There's another Chris Iliopoulos that is more of an independent cartoonist that used to be in Chicago. I don't know if he still is or not. But yeah, I'm like, Chris, I'm like, wait a minute, Eric Larson's Chris? No, that's another guy. And I'm like, oh, okay.
That's funny.
Yeah. Jimmy, great conversation, man. Truly, I really and really, I admire everything you've made, and you will absolutely have my attention at whatever the next project is. So let's not wait, however many years it's been prior to. And here, let me final shout out for the documentary again. Now streaming, everybody. You can find it at run off the platforms again where they can get it and buy it.
Apple, Amazon, YouTube, and if you want to see the full list, just check out mignoladocumentary.com.
Beautiful. There you go, man. No, fantastic conversation, Jim, and I always appreciate your time. So thanks for being on, man.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm doing a show with Shelley Bond, Philip Bond, and Will Potter. They have a Kickstarter going on now for their series Geezer, which is about an 80s rock band. I know it's both a favorite subject of Shelley's and Philip's, and Will Potter was actually part of an 80s rock band. And that's going to be a fun conversation. It's going to happen tomorrow afternoon to accommodate Will, because Will's in London. So Will's going to be broadcasting from London. I'll be here in Chicago. Shelley and Philip are they in Portland? I forget where the hell they are.
I mean, I think they're West Coast.
They're definitely West Coast. Yeah. So it's going to be 4:00 Eastern, 3 p.m. Central, just in case anybody has time and want to join us live. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.